On March 1, 1912, Captain Robert Falcon Scott and his team of 4 men are trudging through Antarctica's frozen wasteland. They've just reached the South Pole, but there's devastating news. A Norwegian flag is already planted there. Explorer Roald Amundsen has beaten them by 35 days. Heartbroken and exhausted, Scott's team begins their 800-mile journey back to base camp. But what happens next turns this into one of history's most tragic polar expeditions, a story of courage, sacrifice, and the cruel power of nature. Scott's expedition had started with high hopes. In June 1910, his ship, the Terra Nova, departed from Cardiff, Wales, heading toward Antarctica. The goal was clear: be the first humans to reach the South Pole. Scott had experience. He'd led an Antarctic expedition before in 1901. This time, he was determined to succeed. Scott's team consisted of 5 men who would make the final push to the pole. Scott himself, Dr. Edward Wilson, a scientist and artist, Captain Lawrence Oates, a cavalry officer, Lieutenant Henry Bowers, a navigation expert, and Petty Officer Edgar Evans, the strongest and most experienced in handling equipment. They had ponies, dogs, and motor sledges to help transport supplies, but the terrain was unforgiving. By November 1911, they began the march toward the pole from their base camp at Cape Evans. The motor sledges broke down almost immediately in the extreme cold. The ponies struggled in the deep snow and freezing temperatures. One by one, they had to be shot. The men were left to haul their sledges themselves, pulling hundreds of pounds of equipment and supplies across the ice. Meanwhile, unknown to Scott, Roald Amundsen and his Norwegian team were also racing toward the pole, but they were faster, more experienced with sled dogs, and had chosen a better route. On December 14, 1911, Amundsen's team reached the South Pole and planted the Norwegian flag. They left a tent, a letter, and a note for Scott, then turned back. On January 17, 1912, after months of grueling effort, Scott's team finally reached the South Pole. But instead of triumph, they found Amundsen's tent and the Norwegian flag flapping in the wind. Scott wrote in his diary, "The worst has happened. All the daydreams must go. Great God, this is an awful place." They had come 800 miles, endured unimaginable hardship, only to find they were second. Crushed and exhausted, they took a gentleman. But Oates' sacrifice wasn't enough. Scott, Wilson, and Bowers pushed on through the blizzards, but their bodies were failing. Frostbite had taken Scott's foot. He could barely stand. Their fuel was nearly gone, their food almost exhausted. They were starving, freezing, and exhausted beyond measure. On March 19, 1912, they were just 11 miles from One Ton Depot, a major supply cache with food, fuel, and warmth. Just 11 miles. But a fierce blizzard struck, trapping them in their tent. For 9 days, the storm raged. They waited, hoping it would clear so they could make that final push. But the weather never relented, and they grew weaker by the hour. Scott used the time to write. He wrote letters to the wives and mothers of his men. He wrote to the public explaining what had happened. He wrote in his diary, documenting every detail. His final entry, dated March 29, 1912, reads, "Every day we have been ready to start for our depot 11 miles away, but outside the door of the tent it remains a scene of whirling drift. I do not think we can hope for any better things now. We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more. R. Scott. For God's sake, look after our people." The 3 men died together.